Welcome back to my YouTube channel and podcast, Wonders and Miracles, where we get to celebrate miraculous moments in everyday lives. I'm your host, Liza Lawrence, and I'm so happy to have you join me today as we talk with Maggie from Utah. Maggie was the first native to be adopted from her small country, Turkmenistan. She was born in this third world country that had a dictator as a leader, and there was no health care. And she spent several months in an orphanage. She was adopted by an American military family who was deployed to her country at that time. I'm excited to have her share with us all the details of her story. But before we jump into this episode, I would like to highlight my favorite gratitude journal, The Blessings I Witnessed Today. I created this journal in hopes that we can capture our daily miracles. Gratitude is a powerful way to notice the miracles that are occurring in your life each day. You can find this journal on my website at wondersandmiracles.com or amazon.com. I'll provide those links below, and start recording your blessings and miracles today. And if you love miracle stories and want to hear more, hit the like and subscribe button so you can catch all the inspiring and uplifting episodes of real people sharing real miracles. So Maggie, thanks for being here, and go ahead and tell us your story.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited. So I was born in Turkmenistan, as you stated. It is a very communist-like country. There's a dictator, and I was born 7 weeks early. And so I was 4 pounds when I was born, which is not great to begin with, let alone a third world country. And then I spent 3 months in the orphanage. And then at that 3 months is when the adoption process started. But I was in the orphanage until I was 9 months old.
And can I ask you, why were you placed in the orphanage? Do you know the history behind that?
Yes. My mom had extramarital relations, and in that country, the father or the husband has the right to kill the wife and the baby. And so she gave me up to save my life and to save her life. So it was the most selfless thing a mother could do. I'm so glad that she did, because I have such an amazing life now. The care in the orphanage was just not great. They didn't have any resources. I was not held the entire time I was in the orphanage. I was in a crib the whole time, no human contact. The orphanage was silent, just because we learned that crying didn't get any assistance. I was fed green tea in my bottles so every third or fourth bottle would be formula and the rest would be green tea, because they didn't have enough resources to feed every baby formula constantly. They thought sunlight was bad for babies. So I was curled up in my crib 24/7. They would prop the bottles up to feed us because there wasn't enough people working there.
So I teach child development, and we actually
really?
talk about babies in orphanages in other countries, really in Romania, because there was a big flood of adoption with Romanian children. And same thing, just silent babies, never held. You know, we talk about how does that affect their development, and maybe you'll go into that. I don't know, but it is fascinating that was your beginning. That's interesting.
Yeah, our orphanage was very much like the Romanian orphanage that is like well known with all the experiments, and they've done so many studies on how it affects adults, and I can go into that in a little bit.
Yeah.
So during that time, my lungs weren't developed, and so I had pneumonia 2 or 3 times before I was 6 months old. I was on the brink of death because there's no health care. They only gave antibiotics until the symptoms went away, but the pneumonia would just come back even worse. So during that time, the orphanage director brought me to the American base because they knew an American family had the medical resources, and she could have gotten in a whole lot of trouble. So she was like, I know this baby's going to die if she doesn't get the help that she needs, and I know that you can do that. My adoptive parents, they were able to get me to be seen with a PA, and I was able to do that. And
so when the orphanage director brought you to these American parents, how did she know to take you to them?
She knew that they were wanting to adopt me. And so she knew, she was like, it's not going to look good if this American family is wanting a baby and it dies in my custody. So she was kind of trying to make sure that it would happen.
Were they looking to adopt a child, or they just knew there was a need there?
So my mom, she's always kind of has a revelation of when she wanted to have kids. She always was like, oh, I feel like there's a baby that needs a life. And so they'll have a baby. And that's been amazing for them. And they got that feeling in Turkmenistan, but there's no health care. So my mom was like, I don't want to give birth with no resources. So she had already been doing service work with the orphanage because my sisters were of young women age, and that's part of the LDS church is 12 to 18 years old. They learn about all these characteristics like finding your divine nature and service. And so my mom would bring the girls of age to hold the babies because they knew that they weren't being held, to read to them and to just have physical contact. And during that time, my mom knew that she wanted to go through the orphanage. They knew they wanted a baby, they knew they needed one, but in the orphanage, most of the kids weren't available for adoption. They had families that just couldn't care for them, and so they were kind of checked out like library books and brought back when they couldn't care for them anymore. And I was one of the true orphans. When the orphanage director was showing them the babies that were available for adoption, I was the last baby they held. And they said that I was the one that told them that I was part of their family. And they knew just from holding me that I had already made that decision as a baby that I was going with this family.
I love that. That's a sweet part of the story, like a spirit communication
Mm-hmm.
that they knew you were theirs and that you knew that you were theirs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they were going to do everything they could to make it happen, and they did. And I'm so grateful.
Were you the only one adopted into this family, or did they adopt other children?
Yes, I am the youngest out of six, and I'm the only one adopted. But with the adoption, there was no process. And so my parents were like, oh, yeah, you can take me home for the weekend. And then they'd be like, oh, no, you can't. Like, we need her back. Like, she can't be in your custody anymore. And then the Soviet Union Turkmenistan was part of the Soviet Union until it disbanded. And so the KGB was still in effect. And so the KGB would constantly show up at the gates of the base and say, hey, you have a Turkmen that's not allowed. You need to give her. And my parents knew that if they did, they'd never see me again. So there was 6 to 9 months of this whole adoption process. They weren't getting anywhere. They couldn't pay for an adoption because that would be seen as a military official doing bribes, or the Turkmen government would be, oh, I don't want to be caught as human trafficking if they're accepting money. And so there was no way to keep this moving. And one day my dad got called into they call him the president, Turkmenbashi's office, but he was a dictator. He got called into his office and he just kept going on about like intimate details about the Chinese diplomats, about the British diplomats. And the point was, I know everything about your family. And the next day, the adoption was finalized. And my parents had thought that this was never going to happen because there's no progress. And then the next day, it was been finalized. So it went up to the Turkmen president to get finalized. And then getting out of the country was a whole other issue. So as soon as I was considered adopted, I was no longer a Turkmen. They considered me a traitor. And then I wasn't a US citizen because I had just been adopted. And so I had no citizenship anywhere. And my parents were expected to be in Germany for their next deployment. And so they were like, I have this little girl, I need help get out of the country. So my dad, he got with all the other diplomats in the country that were there on deployment and was like, hey, I need help brainstorming. Well, the Soviet Union passports were still in circulation. And so I had to get a Soviet Union passport as a baby to even leave the country so I could actually get citizenship in the United States and leave. All these things had to go into place. And it's so crazy that the Turkmen president, he didn't have to have any reason to let a Turkmen go. They weren't known for that. They're the second most closed off country from North Korea, and they don't like their natives to leave. The orphanage director didn't need to have a special interest in me. She didn't need to make sure that I survived. She could have just carried on her life and she would still have gotten paid. And so all these things that happened, there's no way that I can't say that this is a miracle, because everything had to line up. And there was no reason that any of it should have.
And even your bouts with pneumonia and like being born premature and surviving that, like so many little miracles to that you're still alive, that you've survived this. Yeah.
And like this adoption has led to such an amazing life here in this country. I've lived here 20 years out of my 24-year life. And I'm the first Turkmen to graduate from BYU, Idaho. I'm probably one of the first Turkmen women to graduate from a college, because women are so oppressed over there. The Turkmen government has total control over their people, of how their haircuts are, what kind of car they drive, how many kids they have. And so women are just so oppressed. They don't have the same rights as America does. And so to even see how miraculous this country is from other countries has been a huge eye opener. And I wish so many people would be able to see that we're so blessed to live in this amazing country.
I agree that we often don't know how good we have it. And it takes hearing from someone like you that can see both perspectives and that can compare. That's what my life could have been like versus now what it is. Yeah, that helps us, I think, a lot to put things in perspective.
Yeah. Then there's been a lot of anger about my adoption, because it is a psychological trauma, because there's a family that I just don't know. I will never know. And then I'm here with this family who has chosen to love me and chosen to be with me for everything. And trying to not find the anger in that, and trying to look for the miracles, look for how Heavenly Father has blessed me, has been a huge eye-opener, because I could be angry my entire life, but that won't do me any good. That's just going to get in the way of my happiness. And so by taking the time to look for the miracles in every little step of my adoption and all the accomplishments that I've had because of my adoption, just truly shows that Heavenly Father is still here on earth. He still has such a huge hand in all of our lives. And when you start to look for that is when you're going to see the floodgates open.
So often we can get stuck in our pain and miss the miracles. And you know what? They can exist at the same time. And that's part of this life. It is the ups and downs, the hard and the good. You know, we need that opposition in all things to gain perspective, gratitude, appreciation. So I love that you're seeing that if I focus on the miracles, I feel more joy versus focusing on the pain of it. Even though, are there things you've done to help yourself move through that pain?
Yes, I've gone through counseling to kind of look past the anger, because I had a lot of resentment towards my birth mom. Like, she made the choices, but if she didn't make those choices, I wouldn't be here today. If she didn't have the motherly love of sacrifice, I would have still been either killed by her husband, or I would have died in the orphanage. There's no way I would have survived. To have someone say, hey, like, maybe instead of just this anger, let's look at the bright side. And it helps to have someone kind of push that, to kind of get you out of that cycle. And so therapy has been a huge blessing, because it helps me work through everything, the good, the bad, and it helps me get into more peace state of mind. And then just being able to talk to my parents. There's only so much that we know about my birth family. There's no records in that country. So there's no way for me to ever go back, because it's too dangerous for me. I'd be seen as a traitor, and I'd be captured and sent to prison for probably the rest of my life.
So is it considered a communist country?
They claim that they're a democracy, like a republic democracy country, and they have a president, but everyone's too scared to even run against him, because they don't want to go to jail. They don't want to be killed. So they claim that they're a democracy country, but in reality, they're right behind North Korea. And I don't know any other Turkmens that have gotten out. So I feel so blessed that Heavenly Father knew that I needed to do good on this earth, and he knew I couldn't do that from Turkmenistan. And maybe part of doing that is being on this podcast and sharing my experience and sharing how Heavenly Father is still here. Like, he loves us so much. yeah, we go through these terrible times, but if we look, we'll always come out stronger if we have that perspective. Any trials we could say, oh, this one's just going to keep me down. Like, this is it. Like, I'm done. I'm tired. I don't want to try anymore. But Heavenly Father doesn't want that for us. He wants us to grow as a person, and trials are the only way to do that.
Do you ever feel all alone? Like where's my people? Or do you feel that sometimes?
Absolutely. I worked through a lot of survivor's guilt of there's so many kids in that orphanage. Why me? Like, what was so special about me? Or why couldn't all the kids have been saved? And that was a lot to deal with. And I'm like, I was 16 years old and I'm having those feelings. I should be worried about sports and like what outfit to wear. And I'm worrying about this huge burden on my head. And my parents did amazing. My dad has spent the majority of his military career in Asia, and so they have like a bunch of stuff from my country, and I do cultural pictures. So when I graduated, I wore the flag on, and so I said, I'm representing the women in my country. Like, I can be a pioneer because women in that country don't know any better. And maybe they won't see it, but other people will. And so making that effort to include myself culturally, I still stay up to date on the news. I have Turkmen clothing that I'll wear for pictures. I have like hoodies that have the flag. I will talk about my adoption and my past any chance I get because I know it could help someone. I know talking about it for me helps myself and continuing to come to grasp.
I love that. I love that you're using this to empower yourself and potentially others and bring awareness to maybe what's happening, which sounds like most of the world, we just don't know or realize what is actually going on. And I love that you're a representative of that.
I feel like there's so many people in this country that don't understand how the rest of the world works. And I always think it'd be such an amazing idea if people just went out for either a mission or a vacation to kind of just see other cultures and see how amazing cultures are and how diverse it is outside of the United States. That would bring so much more peace and belongingness.
I agree. One of our family's favorite things is travel. When my husband and I first got married, we moved to Russia and we spent a semester over there, and that kind of set the tone for traveling. And you do gain so much perspective by seeing other people and their cultures and how beautiful their practices are and versus ours, and I love it so much. I think there's so much wisdom to gain through learning, and even if you can't travel, but even just learning about other countries and other cultures is powerful.
Absolutely. And I see so many YouTubers that will go to countries and just post so that you don't have to leave the country, but you can still learn about these amazing cultures and all the religions on this earth, and how Heavenly Father has such a wide diversity for us. He loves us. He wants us to be who we are, and he accepts everybody. And so I think if we had that mindset, we could live in such a beautiful place.
I agree. Wouldn't that be an amazing world where we all loved each other and celebrated our variety and differences, even as brothers and sisters of one God? Like, wouldn't that be amazing?
It'd be so beautiful. Because I always felt ashamed to not be born in the United States, because I had a lot of like bias and I had a lot of like racial things coming up, and that just hurt. And I know that people are people, and so they're not going to be the nicest, and that's fine. They all have their agency. But America is all about freedom. And what better way of people coming to enjoy that freedom? Because people don't have freedoms in other countries. Like in Turkmenistan, it's illegal to go to the library. It's illegal to listen to the radio. You can only have white cars because black cars are seen dirty. Women can only have certain haircuts, or they'll ban salons. I think people just don't want to understand that because it's too depressing, or they just don't care. Either way, that doesn't help anybody.
So, what do you feel like, and you might not know yet, but as you look at this as a miracle that your life was spared, you were saved, it was incredible how you actually got adopted and left the country. What do you feel like your role and your purpose now is? And it might unfold. I'm not saying you have to know it right now, but do you have inklings?
I think my purpose here is just to empower women. And I see the women in my country and I see all the rules they have to follow, and they don't have a voice. And so I think my purpose is to be their voice because they don't have the right to speak up. And I think my voice is educating people about other countries. And I only really know about my country. I've lived in other countries before, but educating people that countries don't have the same rights as us. Women don't have the same rights as us. We have so many rights here in America. Women have none in other countries. And I think my purpose is just being a voice for all women, no matter where they come from, and showing them that they can do hard things. They can be pioneers in their own country, because I've been a pioneer for the women in my country. And I feel so blessed for that opportunity because I know I can make a difference. Maybe someone in my country will hear and they'll be like, oh, maybe I want to go to a college, even though it's a Turkmen college and it's probably not great. But I know there's women from my country that can do it.
That's really beautiful. We mentioned the human development. A lot of babies that are adopted tend to have, and you kind of did talk about some of the psychological things, but attachment issues where it's hard to attach. Did you experience any of that?
Yes. When I was 5 or 6 years old, so many years after the adoption, my parents would still have to go in and check to see if I was up from a nap because I didn't cry.
Wow. Yeah.
Because I had learned from such a young age that crying wasn't going to get me any attention. So I had stopped crying. So my parents never knew if I was hurt. They never knew if I was up from a nap, because most kids will cry or they'll talk. And I just would sit there quietly because that's what my brain was wired to do. I still have really bad communication issues. Like, it's hard for me to talk about stuff when it's bothering me. So like my husband and I will get in like a little, I don't want to say like a fight or like an argument, but we'll have a disagreement and I'll just shut down. Not because I don't want to talk with him or resolve it, because that's just what my brain has been wired to do. And so I'll have to have the time to just allow myself to shut down and process it before I can actually have a constructive conversation. There's been also a lot of anxiety and depression from just being in the orphanage and not having any kind of physical touch. It has such a powerful effect on adults. There's been so many studies about the Romanians. So they'll look at the kids in the Romanian orphanage and then look at them adult and they have attachment disorders. They have a lot, like they're 3 times more likely to have anxiety and depression. And there's so much about what happens when we're babies has such a lasting impact of when we're adults. And I feel like people don't understand that. And that's because it doesn't get talked a lot. Because we're in a developed country, people don't really see that attachment disorder unless it's severe cases of abuse. And so I think just being aware, you don't know what people have gone through. Nobody would look at me and say, she's gone through the worst of the worst, unless I talk about that, because I've had so much therapy. I've gone to counseling, and I'm not ashamed to say that. I think everybody should go to counseling.
Amen.
Everyone has something to work through. And I think that just makes me stronger. It gives me a more positive outlook, and it allows me to say, hey, that's not quite normal of me just shutting down. Let's work on that. And there's no shame in that, because we all have things that we need to work on. We all have things that we've gone through that has impacted us. And I think being able to work through that can have a huge impact mentally or even physically.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the biggest things that we look at when I teach this unit with infant development is those babies need human touch for the oxytocin, the hormone oxytocin, which is the bonding hormone. It's the hormone that tells us we're safe and these people are going to take care of me. And when you don't get that, it's much harder to attach to people, to trust people, to know that you can rely on people. Luckily, we can work on that and practice getting oxytocin by touching and holding and, being with people. It does help the body increase our oxytocin, but it definitely does have an impact. And I'm so grateful that you are empowered through the counseling and the therapy, because there's so much we can gain by getting help for
Absolutely.
and from things that you had no control over. You were a situation you were born into. And so that's awesome that you've empowered yourself by finding resources that can help you.
Yeah. I've talked a lot about the conditions of the orphanage. I didn't have any physical touch. It was dead silent because babies learned to not cry. I had rickets because I didn't have sunlight. And so, like, all day long after the adoption process, when my parents had custody of me, they would have me outside all day long because they knew that they could reverse it. And if they didn't, then it'd be severe complications growing up. And I think people think of orphanages as, oh, this is a safe place. These are where babies, but the majority of the time, they're forgotten kids. The government doesn't have the money or doesn't want to put the money on to fund this. And when my parents left, they left all of their food. They gave it all to the orphanage because they couldn't take it. And my parents knew that these kids didn't see anything. It was the caretakers that would go home and bring it to them because they had nothing. And so that's just the country that I was born into, is the people have nothing. And so coming from nothing and feeling like I have everything in the world, I'm a college graduate. I have the love of my life. There's so much that comes from my story. And there's so much that I'm figuring out. Like, I'll have a family someday. I'll have grandkids. I'll have a career. I might be a voice for a huge nonprofit company of helping women in developing countries find their rights. And I think we can always look for the negative in our life because there will always be negative. But Heavenly Father doesn't want you to just have such a depressing life. He wants you to take your experiences and grow and find the joy, because there is always joy in life. And there's so much power to that.
I love your message. I agree with you. And I love that is your message. Like, it just is emanating from you. Like, this is who I am, and here's my message.
Thank you.
So I appreciate you sharing it, and I love it so much. And I can absolutely see the hand of God in your story. And from the very beginning, it's very clear that God had a work for you to do. So,
yeah. And I'm not sure what that is. I'm still figuring it out. And that's just part of the plan.
It absolutely is. And it's okay.
It is.
And it might change. It'll be like, at this point, this is what I'm here to do. And now I'm moving into this next phase. And that's totally part of our whole life experience.
Absolutely. And I always get goosebumps when I tell my story, because I know it's just reconfirming that Heavenly Father had this whole plan for me, even though my parents didn't know it, my birth mom didn't know it, and it all just came together as He needed it to.
I love that. Well, thank you, Maggie. I do appreciate hearing your story, and you are a beautiful soul. And I'm so grateful for your experience and that you're willing to share it.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be a part of this. And I love your message out in the world of looking for those miracles.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Wonders and Miracles. I hope you enjoyed Maggie's miracle story. I love that her adoptive parents felt a spiritual draw to adopting her and to helping her get out of that country, and that she's using her life experience as a way to empower her to be a voice for women who are oppressed and be that example, that pioneer, that we can change things and that God is on our side. And I love that she is seeing her life as a miracle rather than as the pain or the problems that came from her situation, that she's seeing the blessings. And I think that's a beautiful part of, if we can focus on the positive, focus on the miracles, things in our lives do change and we feel more joy. And I would like to invite you to take record of your own blessings, of your own miracles on a daily basis, so that you can also start shifting your focus into the blessings that are happening in your lives rather than the problems. And you can pick up my gratitude journal on my website at wondersandmiracles.com or on amazon.com and start recording the miracles and blessings that you experience every day. There are things happening in our lives that are beautiful. Even if we're amidst the struggle, we can still find blessings, and that will help us keep that focus and see where God is supporting us. So I hope that you start recording those blessings, and remember to notice and celebrate miracles everywhere, because the more miracles we notice, the more miracles happen. Have a great day.